Well, hello, everyone. Welcome once again to After Further Review with Mark Ferrer and John Pelkey. Our producer, Jeff Taylor, joins us, as always, as well. If you're watching us on YouTube, hello. This was Mark's idea.
Hello.
If,
yes. John agreed to it.
If you're listening
we
to us on podcast,
we had a meeting.
It was presented to me as a unilateral decision. If you're listening on the podcast, again, thanks for joining us. We greatly appreciate it for what is our fifth deep dive?
Deep dive 5.
Deep dive 5. All right.
On the year Roman numeral. I've been doing Roman. Sorry about that. I've been
doing
Roman numerals as opposed to Greek digits or whatever it is. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Are you drunk?
It's already.
Let's just get it out of the way because you don't. It's my deep dive. So I got all the stuff. So all you have to do is make some sort of. You just have to be quippy boy throughout the entire thing.
Right.
Just quip every now and then.
Since 4 a.m.
Wow, good for you. And you were up till 2:30 arguing on Facebook. I was trying part of that till about 12:30.
Highly reasonable. I was doing my best to be highly reasonable.
See, I don't think that's true, Mark. I think sometimes you're highly reasonable because you know that'll continue the discussion longer, and you just kind of. It's like me watching Cops. It's just like I just watch it and I go, thank God I'm not any of these people who are being arrested. And you do that and you go, thank God I'm not any of these people posting this, but let's keep it going. It's entertaining as all hell.
See, again, I actually was trying to wrap everything up. And I don't think there's anything I do, John, that you don't ascribe some sort of cynical, evil,
sinister, ulterior motive. That's
motive.
I should call you
there's
Sam,
nothing
because there's always a sinister, ulterior motive to everything that you do.
Right. That's just unbelievable. And yet for 21 years, you still choose to work with this sinister, evil, I
don't care.
Ulterior motive guy.
I'm a horrible person. I'm a horrible person. So whatever.
He's a glutton.
Yeah. Whatever. And you laugh at you generally laugh at my jokes. And
I do laugh at your jokes. I do.
Yeah, you do. All right. Before we jump into 1941, the last year of peace. It seems like it needs to be said that way.
It does.
It should be said that way. And in the background, Sing, Sing, Sing should be playing constantly.
That should be maybe the next level to this, John, is a little music. Little underscore for to set the tone of the story.
I thought you meant you wanted to do music deep dive next time, which honestly, that'd right up all of our alleys with that. That'd be great if we do classic albums deep dive. I'm all for that. But before we jump into it, there are sports going on. The NBA got back underway over Disney. Looks terrific. Seems like things are going well over there. Major League Baseball has another outbreak with the Cardinals that's caused a game to be postponed, but seems like a smaller outbreak. Looks like they're going to be able to navigate through it. We're still not 100% sure. At least I'm not with what's going on with the Marlins. Anything new that you picked up on prior to coming on today?
No, I mean, I think what they're trying to do is contain everything as it happens. And it didn't seem like it was obviously, I don't think anything's going to rival what the Marlins has been. How many of the players and coaches and staff have tested positive now, John?
126.
So I don't think it'll get that close. Yeah. I don't think it'll get that close.
I think it's up to 18 actually as well.
I do love the idea of the 7-inning games to try and make up
double headers.
It's an agile response. And to me, that's what's going to have to happen because this is all brand new territory. Everyone's hacking through the jungle with a machete. There are no paths already cleared. Right. So I think I like that. And we'll see how many dominoes fall, which is your favorite thing to say every time you post something with a good friend of ours, Riley Claremont, and me. You
I just post an article and then just says dominoes.
And then just say dominoes. It's like at some point in time, I'm wondering when Saigon's going to fall.
I do have an update on the Marlins.
Yeah, what's the latest?
So they are splitting the team up. The sick players are going to stay home. They're going to travel to Baltimore to start that series, and they're going to be joined by the next crop of players to replace the infected players.
Okay.
That is the plan as of right now. So we'll see if that happens.
You go.
I think it's 16 rostered players that are going to be quarantining.
Okay. All right.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, and it's a perfect organization to dip down into those other 30 that they have on the rosters of the total of 60 that they were allowed to bring into the top because, it was going to be that year anyway for the Marlins. They were going to tank. They were going to try out all kinds of talent. And now they get a perfect excuse to do that.
The article I read said, all right, so is there any way that the Marlins can play somewhere else? Maybe it's time to start choosing different places for some of these teams, like the Rangers,
and honestly,
the Astros, the Marlins.
I just keep thinking the way you said that, Jeff, is that if you had on your bingo card, break up the Marlins, that would not have been what I would have thought would have been on the bingo card for 2020. But all right, so yeah, I agree with you, Mark. And we're going to jump into this because there's a lot to go through in 1941. But I think baseball, while they obviously weren't ready for the size of the outbreak, and Rob Manfred admitted that the size they were thinking they didn't think they'd get into double digits. They thought at most 6-8 players or members of the organization. But they are remaining agile. Doubleheaders to make up games will be 7 innings. The runner on second at the beginning of extra innings will start in the 8th. It's so much fun to watch the discussion about that on Monday. I hope we can talk more about it because I've watched a crap load of baseball since it's been on. Brian Ascari, Chief of the Fire, chiming in free. Joe Kelly. I watched that game in real time. It was as entertaining a baseball game as I have ever seen in my entire life. So fun stuff. It's been fun stuff, and fingers crossed that baseball can get through this.
And the NBA started last night, and of course, it's
amazing how well
fun stuff.
It's amazing how good everyone stuff looks over there when we're not there. Are you getting me on delay, Mark? You're getting me on delay, aren't you? You're getting me on some sort of delay.
At this point in time,
yeah.
I am.
All right, fair enough.
So
Go ahead.
I'll just let you talk.
No. I got plenty of talking to do.
Okay. So the thing is about last night with the Lakers and the Clippers, everyone was acting, and this was great. Everyone was acting as if the Lakers lost, then watch out for the Clippers. But if the Clippers lost, it was like, well, they don't really take the regular season as seriously. That's what Kawhi and Toronto did last year. It's what they do. So I would say, though, that the average pundit, John Pelkey and Jeff, if you agree with me, let me know. The average pundit thinks that the Clippers have the better roster. And I don't think there's any doubt about that they have top to bottom a better roster, top to bottom a better organization than the Lakers. So I would say on some level, because of those two huge factors, I would say even though they're 6.5 games behind the Lakers in the standings with 7 to play or whatever it is until the playoffs, that really the underdogs between those two teams, probably the Lakers.
I agree with you. I agree with you on the fact that the Clippers are the better organization / team. And I'll say this too. The worst GM in the league is LeBron James. Why they let him make player personnel calls so often, I can't understand, but he needs to realize that he needs to keep playing basketball and never, ever be a GM.
Well,
He's worse than Michael Jordan.
I would say that falls onto the GM more than it does to LeBron James. LeBron James just being LeBron James. The GM can actually say, "Listen, I'm the GM, and I can make the moves I want."
I think you're right, but I think these GMs are afraid of him. I think he comes to these teams and he says, "I want this, I want that." They give him everything that he wants, so they need a stronger GM. So he's not the GM.
All right, great stuff to talk about on Monday. Because there will be a lot of that. And Jeff, I'm just going to say, don't open up the LeBron James can of worms with Mark.
We only have 4 hours for this.
We only have the rest of our lives not working to do this podcast, and we'll never get it through it at that point in time. All right. Well, let's just dive into it, shall we? The year in sports, 1941. The last year of peace, not a full year, obviously, as Pearl Harbor on December 7th will end peace for the United States. But it is a magical year, really, in sports, and it is the last year. Mark, how many documentaries have you and I seen where they refer to as the last innocent year, 1941?
Yep. And take a look at that picture, folks. It was pastoral then. That's the America. That's the America that we always refer to when talking about, traditional values.
If you're listening to the podcast, it's basically a swing at dusk in some sort of flyover state. That's what it is. All right. So the last year of peace, Franklin Roosevelt is elected to an unprecedented third term in the fall of 1940. He'll be sworn in I believe, March of 40. I think that for that one, they were still swearing them in March. He'll also throw out the opening pitch for the Washington Senators in 1941. He calls it his 9th year in the majors. So there is Franklin Roosevelt. 1940, the New York Yankees had an off year. They finished 3rd, 2 games behind Detroit. Cleveland was 1 game back. They'd finished first 36 through 39 and won the series in each and every one of those years. So down year for the New York Yankees, Mark, as you know, I mean, they were the marquee franchise in any sport. Down year for the Yankees was something that people talked about.
Well, again, remember, folks, the Yankees have had spurts of dominance and dynastic, a dynastic history. They didn't win anything until the 20s, and then they won one, I think, in the early 20s. And of course, it was Murderers Row, late 20s.
Right.
And then they won a couple more, and then there was about a 3-year dry period until Joe DiMaggio shows up in 1936, and then they win 3 in a row, John.
Right.
And at that point in time, everyone had forgotten all the struggles that the Yankees had just to get to their first World Series in the 20s, and then all of the problems that happened in the mid-30s before Joe DiMaggio got there, and they're already complaining by 1940, about the team, about DiMaggio, about everything else. It's hilarious.
Well, they were managed by. Let me just say this at first. To your point, from 1927 to 1953, they were 15-1 in World Series that they played in. 16 World Series. It's as much as I dislike them, they are the most successful franchise of all time. Managed by the great Joe McCarthy, whose name will be sullied by a Wisconsin senator in decade or so. Joe McCarthy, by the way, Mark, born in Philadelphia. So a nod back to your deep dive, the great city of Philadelphia. Passed away in 1978, 90 years, 90 nice. Joe McCarthy years.
Nice.
As a manager, he had a 615 winning percentage. He was 2,125 wins, 1,333 losses, 29 ties. He managed the Cubs, the Yankees, and the Red Sox. 24 years, won 5 years with the Cubs, won a pennant, 8 pennants, 7 World Series with the Yankees, went to the Red Sox and had Red Sox-like luck and did not win any pennants or any World Series, obviously. They would meet in the World Series that year, and one of the reasons it made that year so special, they would meet the Brooklyn Dodgers. Brooklyn Dodgers had been in a World Series in 1921. It had been the last time that they had been there. They were under their 3rd year with player manager, which I would like to see a lot more of in Major League Baseball, Mark. Player managers. I think the last one was Pete Rose with Cincinnati. I believe the last player manager.
Right. That's probably right. Like in the mid 80s.
That was, DeRocher managed them 39 through 46. He was suspended for the historic 47 season.
Sure.
Though he was very, very good on African-American players in baseball. He was completely for it. In fact, at one point, DeRocher made the comment that there were plenty of players in the Negro leagues that could play and play well in Major League Baseball. And he was asked by the powers to be to take that back. And he walked it back a little bit. But he was a player in 39, 40, 41, 43, and 45 for the Dodgers as well. The greatest quote possibly that I've ever heard, and it refers to you and I as well, Mark, was said about Leo DeRocher. He had an infinite capacity for making a bad situation worse. That is brilliant stuff. But he did take over. Go ahead.
He was a great manager. Did some great things for the Dodgers. Did some great things for the Giants a little bit later. And harkening back to your Miracle Mets, John. He was the manager of the '69 Chicago Cubs that were in control and in first place in the NL East, the first year of the NL East,
and
that entire season.
He ran him into the ground because he shortened his rotation. He shortened his bullpen in that year, and he wasn't successful. However, we're going to talk about successful Leo DeRocher. He took over a Dodger team that had finished 7th in 1938. They were 69 and 80, and in 39 they went 84 and 69, and they finished in 3rd place, which was for the folks, for them bums to do that. The folks in Flatbush were pretty darn impressed, though 41 still came as a bit of a surprise. Jumping back to how that Brooklyn team was put together, their GM was a guy by the name of Larry MacPhail. And MacPhail's family is littered through sports in the 20th and 21st century. He had sons and grandsons who worked in Major League Baseball. It worked in sports broadcasting. And MacPhail himself was a really, really interesting guy. He got into baseball by taking over the Columbus Senators of the American Association back in the 30s. And he really was, along with Branch Rickey, who was putting together farm system in St. Louis, when Branch Rickey, who would eventually would replace MacPhail as the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1942. He developed the farm system, Branch Rickey. Most of those American Association teams and those small teams really didn't have team affiliations. Rickey put that together. MacPhail saw it as a good thing to do. He renamed the team the Redbirds. They became a farm system of the Cardinals. He installed stadium lights, which he was built a new stadium, installed lights in that stadium, and that team actually finished second. They had been a cellar dweller prior to that, but the real reason I bring that up, Mark, with the lights, they drew 310,000 fans. In the 1933 season, I believe it was, the Cardinals drew 279,000 as a minor league team because they put lights in. He actually outdrew the Cardinals. Right. And again, everybody who thinks baseball's in trouble, go back and look at what attendance was in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. A lot of that having to do with playing day games in the middle of the week, but still, it is remarkable. And there were numerous minor league teams back in 1941 that outdrew major league teams. Here's a little story that I really love about Larry MacPhail. I told you, Mark, about this, I think, in pre-show prep. He was an artillerist. He was in an artillery battalion in World War II. And after the armistice, the Kaiser Wilhelm, the head of Germany, was being kept in, I think, Holland, someplace in Holland. And MacPhail's commanding officer said, we're gonna go kidnap the Kaiser, and we're gonna put him on trial. We're going to kidnap him. We're going to put him on trial. So they went to kidnap, and they MacPhail, his commanding officer, a couple other guys, they show up and they're like, "Where's the Kaiser? We want to talk to him." Well, the authorities kind of figured, it's probably not a good idea, and said, "Well, you wait here. We'll get him." And as they're sitting around waiting, it's Caine Mutiny like with Fred McMurray and the Caine Mutiny, where they sitting there for a bit, and somebody finally goes, They're probably calling the authorities, right? They're going to arrest us because what we're doing is illegal, immoral, whatever you want to say. So they all decided they had to get the hell out of there. Larry MacPhail steals an ashtray. And to this day, MacPhail's descendants have that ashtray that he stole from the Kaiser. So they give you an idea of what Larry MacPhail was like. In 1933, he was hired as the GM of the Reds as well. He ends up in Brooklyn in 1938. He was a pioneer of night baseball on television, and flying teams back and forth to games. It had all been trained at that point, buses and trains. And he really thought that the upcoming aviation industry would work really well with baseball. And he was right. They still give away the Larry MacPhail Award for the best promotional department of a major league or minor league team. So, and
to your point, I mean, what a legacy with his family.
Yes.
I mean, didn't Andy MacPhail run the Cubs?
He did
for a while.
Yep. He had, as I said, his progeny were huge in sports broadcasting, several different baseball teams that they worked for. And I believe there are MacPhails working in Major League Baseball even today.
Right.
He was a heavy drinker. So, golf clap from this show. He was once drinking with Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey, and they both decided that they were going to swap Joe DiMaggio for Ted Williams.
Right, I saw that.
And they, cooler heads prevailed when they hadn't had a couple of pops. But if you think back to what that would have done in the early 40s, how that would have changed baseball. Leo DeRocher had a really good quote about Larry.
Now let's
Yes.
talk about that. How would it have changed anything? You know, in my opinion, would anything have changed? The Yankees were still the Yankees. The Red Sox were still the Red Sox.
They would have, but okay. You make a really good point about that. But just DiMaggio generally was a guy who came up the biggest in the biggest of games,
right?
And Ted Williams was largely a compiler. He only played in one World Series,
right?
And he hit 200.
I know, but that's just one World Series.
I know, agreed.
And Willie Mays doesn't have a great track record in the series, and in terms of postseason appearances, Barry Bonds was atrocious for a while until those later years with the Giants. Once he got all that going, but I think that it really is that, John. It really is like the stink of the Red Sox.
Well, then definitely
choking is with Ted Williams and this allure and this mystery around the Yankees would follow DiMaggio to Boston, but I don't think so. I think DiMaggio would become a Red Sox and they would lose, and he would might have some clutch hits, but anyway, I don't know.
It would be interesting too, because DiMaggio was such a private man, and the New York media is rough. And at this point, I think we all agree playing in New York may be one of the most difficult places to play. But at that point, the Boston media was really pretty nasty, and they had a really contentious time with Williams. It would have been interesting to see Williams with the New York media, but it probably would have been a push. You're absolutely right, but it still would have been great. Can you imagine the ultimate blockbuster deal? It's like Patrick Mahomes for Tom Brady, though they're both within a couple of years of each other. So DeRocher's quote on McPhail
would have been Tom Brady for Peyton Manning back in the day.
Yeah, that's exact. There you go. That's a better analogy. I know that means a lot to you. So good for you. You're up.
Tom Brady being Joe DiMaggio and Peyton Manning being Ted Williams.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. DeRocher's quote on McPhail: "There's a thin line between genius and insanity, and in Larry's case, the line was so thin you could see him drifting back and forth." It was said that he was great after one drink. He was a genius after one drink, smart after two, and a complete and utter nut job after three.
Well, he lived to 85, so it worked for him.
Honestly. I know. Pickled. He was pickled. The Keith Richards of his era. Larry McPhail.
Larry McPhail.
All right. That's right, man. All right, Larry. We partied. I can't confirm nor deny that Keith Richards ever snorted Larry McPhail's ashes, though. So we will look into that. We will have our crack team of reporters look into that. All right, let's jump into January of 1941 and the heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis. There's Joe Louis. Arguably, well, not even arguably, top three fighters of all time. Would you agree?
It's tough not to put him in there. It's tough not to put him in terms of American boxers.
Yeah.
I would say, you have to have Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali in there. You got to have Joe Louis in there. I mean, Rocky Marciano in there.
Marciano, Lewis, and Ali were the three that I was going to say is your top three, and I think you could shuffle them a little bit, and that would work. But anyway, Lewis has a busy 1941. It's called his bum of the month year.
They threw a lot of tomato cans at him, as they would say.
He fought 7 times in 1941.
See, that's
nuts. One fight every 7.5 weeks.
Got paid $25 per, I think.
No, actually, that's why he fought all his bums, was to keep the revenue stream going. Boxing was the most popular sports in 1941 were baseball, boxing, and horse racing. And Louis wanted to keep that revenue stream going. There certainly, Joe Louis was a smart man, and the people around him were pretty smart, and they could see the possibility of war coming. So they're trying to pack as much in as they possibly can because they see what's going to happen down the line. Professional athletes are not getting deferments for the Second World War as they did in the First World War. But anyway, his first fight was against a guy named Red Berman. It was a KO in the 5th. He'd win 2 more by knockout, 3 by technical knockout, and 1 by disqualification. There is one classic fight in all of these, though Louis did find himself challenged at a point. He would fight again February 17th, so that's 6 weeks later. He KOs Gus Durazo in the 2nd round. So not pretty easy first couple of months of 1941. It will get a little more difficult for Joe Louis. As I mentioned, Mark, as we move into March, baseball teams are now going to spring training. The very first Major League Baseball player is drafted, and he is a guy by the name of Hugh Mulcahy. If you're watching us, you're going to see a picture of Hugh. In 1940, Hugh lost 22 games for the Philadelphia Phillies, and he was an all-star. So he was Steve Carlton before Steve Carlton, because the Phillies were as bad an organization as there was in Major League Baseball at that point in time. His nickname, do you know what Hugh Mulcahy's nickname was, Mark? I
actually do.
Losing pitcher.
Losing pitcher. Steve Carlton never had losing pitcher as a nickname.
He didn't.
So
he didn't.
I will beg to differ with your comparison.
Well, he was an all-star on a horrible team, and you're right. He lost a lot of games, but not because of Hugh Mulcahy. Hugh Mulcahy was actually a good pitcher, but losing pitcher appeared by his name so many times that was his nickname, losing pitcher. He was your first Major League Baseball player drafted. But again, I mentioned during the First World War, baseball players got cushy jobs in the defense industry. And really, there were guys who served. Certainly, Christy Mathewson was gassed in a training exercise and ended his career, the great Christian gentleman, one of the greats of all time, and a former New York Giant, Mark. So I throw you a little bit of a bone there. The most successful baseball player who was drafted, and he was drafted and went into the military in May of 41. He had registered back in 1940. I believe he was the first player to actually register for the draft. He was initially 4F, which means didn't have to go to war. He had flat feet, which would keep you out of the war. Reclassified on the 18th of April, and he ended up as the longest serving military member of Major League Baseball, longest serving baseball player in the military. That sentence just did not come out the way that I wanted it to be. And I'm going to dwell on this moment here where it all fell apart. But he served 47 months. That's the whole point. Hank Greenberg is his name, the great Detroit Tiger. He missed Hall of Famer. 19 games he played in 1941, missed all of 42, 43, and 44. In 1940, he won his second MVP, the first in 1935. His stats in 1943, he had 340 with 41 home runs, 150 RBI. They lost the series to Cincinnati that year. The team dropped to 75 and 79 without Greenberg. Greenberg is one of the great forgotten players in baseball.
No doubt.
He lost essentially Ted Williams complained about the years that he lost to World War II and Korea. But in the prime of his career, Greenberg lost four seasons. So he's not talked about because in a sport that's so focused on statistics, career statistics don't look as great, because he missed all of those years. But Hank Greenberg was the best player in baseball in 1940.
You go back. I encourage everyone to go back, to go to the best website ever created, Baseball Reference.
I spent a lot of time there.
And I'm sure you did. And so do I. And Hank Greenberg, you look at individual seasons. He set the record for RBIs, didn't he, John? With 190 or something like that?
Yes, he did.
So, this guy had dominant seasons. And if that's how you measure up a true Hall of Famer, and I think that's how most people do measure up true Hall of Famers, there's no question about that with Hank Greenberg. But to your point, Johnny, the one sport that does sort of favor compilers on some level is Major League Baseball. Look at Don Sutton.
Right. Well, exactly. And the whole thing about that too is football doesn't do that. And I have my issues with all of the Hall of Fames and how people are elected, and having to make a guy, why is he better 7 years after he retired than he was 5, and all that kind of crap. But you look at Vinny Testaverde's numbers.
Oh yeah,
he has Hall of Fame numbers because he's around forever.
Yeah,
and Vinny had a couple of good.
He had a couple decent
seasons.
Yeah, a couple of Pro Bowl-esque seasons. And for a while, he was over 40,000 yards. Now, 40,000 10 years ago,
right?
12 years ago, when we started looking at Vinny Testaverde. It's like, wait a minute, look at these guys. This guy's career numbers. 40,000 though is not that impressive anymore.
No.
These days, with the way the NFL is, a guy can come into the league. Patrick Mahomes will have 40,000 yards thrown probably by mid-season this year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on the year. That'll be well, and they'll only get through midseason. That's my guess at this point, anyway.
Dominoes,
we'll
John. Dominoes
are falling, brothers.
Yeah, it's when Saigon going to fall, when Laos is going to fall.
All right, sticking around in March and jumping to the sport of professional football, which we're not going to visit again until late in the fall. But they do have an interesting moment. They signed their very, very first commissioner, Elmer Layden, who I am contractually obligated by my family to mention I am related to by marriage.
Your family that never listens to the show somehow contractually has obligated you to mention this in a show they never listen to.
You know as well as I do, Mark, family stuff is just weird. It just gets weird. But by marriage, I am related to Elmer Layden, who is not famous for being the first commissioner of the National Football League.
Right.
Nor is he famous for calling for the national anthem to continue to be played at the beginning of games following World War II. That was something that started in World War II. It hadn't happened before. It had happened, I guess, a couple of times during the First World War, just out of nowhere. But he was the one who called for teams to continue doing that. So blame him.
Yep, it's the NFL.
Blame
the NFL
him.
is always at the center of this damn thing.
Blame him. But that's not why he's famous. He's famous because he was one of Notre Dame's 4 horsemen. Made famous by Grantland Rice, and I was going to read the Grantland Rice quote because it's just so beautiful, but I just don't really have time. I ask you to go check it out. The Grantland Rice quote about the 4 horsemen of Notre Dame, still considered one of the great backfields of all time. But Elmer Layden was one of those guys. And there's the only Notre Dame reference throughout the rest of the show, Mark. Would you like to take
Elmer Layden? That's really good, but it's nice though. It's nice we have at least one Notre Dame reference in there, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's just remarkable. And that's if you're watching the YouTube, you have a picture of him up there. But Elmer Layden, I believe, John, was only 38 years old.
Yep,
when he was tasked to be the commissioner of the National Football League in 1941. So
and he was
quite a career.
Yeah, and he got really good marks because he navigated the NFL through World War II, and a lot of things that people may not know. The Steelers and the Eagles merged to play as the Steagles, I believe, in 42, 43, or 43 and 44.
What a name!
See, it's third on the list of what the Washington football team may be named come next year. The Steagles.
The Steagles.
Makes no sense whatsoever. All right, moving forward in March, Franklin Roosevelt signs Lend-Lease. Google it, people. It's a big moment prior to the Second World War.
It is a big moment for the Brits because they need our help in a huge way at that point.
Yeah, because they're really fighting the Axis on their own at this point.
They really are. They were holding down the fort for a long time before we lumbered in. And
Lend-Lease basically said that we would lend them materials for the war, weapons and the like, and that we would get leases on British ports around the world so that the U.S. Navy could use those ports. So that, again, the 11th of March, 1941. 10 days later, Joe Louis is going to fight because, hell, it's been, a couple of hours. So you might as well get it on again. Gets taken 13 rounds, technical knockout, by a guy by the name of Abe Simon. And Abe Simon, not famous for the fact that he took Joe Louis 13 rounds, but Abe Simon famous because he became an actor, as many of these boxers did. It's very odd to me, Mark.
Outside of Joe Louis.
Yeah, but he was in both Requiem for a Heavyweight and On the Waterfront.
Man, Abe. Now, Abe was a pretty good boxer, John. Hence
he was
going that far with Joe Louis. I mean, I think he came in there as a bona fide.
He was, contender. When you say, calling everybody bums that he played, they obviously weren't all bums. There were a couple of guys there, and I mean, as we go through, you'll see the knockouts.
I read a little bit about that fight, and I think the judges gave him 3 or 4 of the rounds.
He did, yeah. So yeah. And a lot of people think that Louis was taking a paycheck through then because he knew he was probably going to end up in the military, but he does have a couple of tough fights. You're right, Abe Simon, future star of On the Waterfront, supporting actor in On the Waterfront and Requiem for
Does he stay alive in on the waterfront?
I believe he does.
Okay.
I believe he does. Yeah, a lot of boxers playing those guys down around the wharves.
Those dock guys.
Those dock workers. Yeah, a lot of boxers down there. A lot of boxers.
Yep.
So
Check it out, folks. Yes, it's
great.
almost a 70-year-old reference, but who cares?
Yeah, whatever. That's the show. That's what we have.
Show. I mean, the show's an 80-year-old reference, just the entire context of this deep dive.
With 100-year-old hosts. So there you go. All right, moving forward to the month of April. The month of April, on the 8th of April, which is like 18 days later, Joe Louis fights again, by the way.
Great.
He fights Tony Musto and gets a TKO in the 9th. I got nothing on Tony Musto, so we're not going to talk anymore about it. On the 12th, 4 days later, Boston Bruins beat the Detroit Red Wings 4-0 to win their third Stanley Cup. It is the first ever 4-0 sweep in a 7-game series.
Wow.
Yep. How about
right.
that? So 1941 was just full of stuff. Only 8 teams in the NHL. Excuse me, 6 teams in the NHL.
Yeah, the original 6 teams. Yeah.
In the NHL. So a couple of things there. Much easier to win a championship and much harder to make a team. So those are the two things. There are numerous members of the Vancouver Canucks who would not have made the 1941 Boston Bruins.
Right. There's no question. Even with heightened nutrition and fitness practices.
Oh, absolutely not. Just wouldn't happen. Also,
then too, they had no masks. They had no helmets.
No.
The sticks weren't the sticks sawed off and sharp like knives. I mean, it was pretty brutal.
Yeah,
I mean,
they were just knives,
right?
They were just knives, and they didn't even play on ice. I think it was sawdust back then. So it was it was a bizarre scene.
Strange,
and we shan't talk anymore about it.
No, it was very, very tough time.
By the way,
chapter.
5 days later, the slow disintegration of a former American hero does continue. On the 17th of April, Charles Lindbergh goes full America first for the first time. I mean, it had been pretty obvious, but by April of 41, he's just a full on America firster. It's really a sad story. It's a tragic story of the fall of an American hero. We'll revisit Lindy in a bit and quote him just so we can destroy him in everybody's eyes.
Well, it's just so weird by that point in time, by April, I guess there were a few that were still holding out. I mean, our ambassador to Britain, for crying out loud.
Right. Joe Kennedy
was holding out. Yeah. The father of a future president, future couple of senators.
I think too, part of it, Mark, is that they've started to see that the odds of staying out of this thing had become less and less and less and less. We'd already embargoed the Japanese oil. We'd kept rubber away from them. It was, of course, in hindsight, it looks inevitable. It wasn't inevitable, but it felt that way for a lot of people. So I think guys like Lindy, who did not want to fight, did not want us involved in the war. And he was buddies with Hermann Goering, and he also had some, he had seen World War I, and it had been a bit of a bloodbath, and we were only over there for about a year. There were reasons to want to stay out of the war, but it was
most of the country didn't want to get into the war.
It was about 60% up until the summer of 41. Maybe it was starting to turn at this point.
Right.
No small part to Edward R. Murrow's broadcasts from London at that point, which kind of turned the tide a little bit. Also, and some happier news, on the 26th of April, the first ballpark organ. First time somebody put an organ in the ballpark and played organ music, which is just one of the great. Yeah. You want to guess what team?
The Cincinnati Reds.
Chicago Cubs.
Chicago Cubs. That's nice.
The Chicago Cubs.
Well, it's interesting because we've talked about 1941 being the last year of peace, the last year of innocence, a pastoral time for us. And in terms of a pastoral experience with Major League Baseball, obviously the organ playing is a huge part of that backdrop.
Oh, yeah.
And it's odd that the last year before all of it changed for all of us here in America, they barely got that organ that encompasses a huge part of a narrative that we assume was happening, for 80 years prior.
Yeah, nope. 1941 Chicago Wrigley Field, the very first ever. Let's take a look at the Yankees and the Dodgers and how they come out of the first month of the season. The Yankees go 10-6. They're in third place, which they'd finished the year before. So Yankee fans kind of thinking, maybe another year of this. The Dodgers are the Dodgers. They go 4-4 and then win 9 straight to end the month 13-4. Dodgers had a worse record than the Yankees, but they had longer winning streaks generally during the season. But that's kind of the Dodgers. It was sort of a feast or famine team. They kept you interested, and then they just broke your heart. But they did end the month at 13-4 and in first place.
Sure.
Moving
Be a tough
now.
National League if you're not in first place with a 13-4 record.
Yes, moving now to the month of May. Ted Williams makes his first appearance. There he is, the splendid Splinter. At this point, Ted Williams, a great hitter, considered a bit of an oddity in baseball, the kid, because was completely focused on hitting, nothing else. Nothing else. Had a decent arm, but he was not a good outfielder.
Sure.
He could sometimes make up with his athleticism, and again, he had the great arm. But you see video or film at the time of Ted Williams between pitches out there, as opposed to watching the batter. He's out there practicing his swing because he said he wanted to be the greatest hitter of all time. He was a good hitter by the end of May. He was hitting .308, but that would be his lowest batting average of the year. Excuse me, in the beginning of May. On the 2nd of May, he was hitting .308. That was the lowest his batting average would be throughout the year in what would turn out to be a magical and historic year. On the 3rd, one day after that, Whirlaway wins the Kentucky Derby. There he is, the long-tailed Whirlaway with Eddie Arcaro up. Now, I don't know about you, Mark, but when I was a kid, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, the Belmont, family got together for that and watched that stuff. Yours?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Just checking in.
Absolutely. Ours did too. Believe it or not, out in California, we're burning down missions. We're still interested in those Kentucky traditions and horse racing traditions as well. Maryland traditions and I guess New York traditions. But I mean, I'll never forget Secretariat.
Oh, of course
I was 12 at the time, and that was huge. And the way Secretariat blew away the field in the Belmont was remarkable. And of course, once that happens, you start, if you're a guy like me or a guy like you start reading about the history of Triple Crowns. And Eddie Arcaro. Eddie Arcaro was obviously front and center, would always just pop up as one of the greatest jockeys.
We won 4,779 races in his career, 5 Kentucky Derbies, 6 Preaknesses, 6 Belmonts. He won the Triple Crown in 41 and 48.
Wow.
He was the poster child.
Eddie Arcaro.
And then it became Billy Shoemaker. It was Eddie Arcaro and Billy Shoemaker were the 2 jockeys that I remember. Mark, I
remember Willie Shoemaker too. I remember him being called Willie Shoemaker.
Willie Shoemaker. I'm so sorry. Yep, you're absolutely right.
But you may have known him on a more personal level, John.
we're very close. He still owes me money. Here's a quick one though. If you're Secretariat, who was up? Who rode Secretariat? What was the jockey's name for 5 additional points?
I don't know actually.
Ron Turcotte would be the answer to that.
Point
out Ron Turcotte.
Okay.
Ron Turcotte, a great jockey in his own right, though not
that.
Eddie Arcaro. You won't remember it by the end of the show. We're old. That's how it works. By the way, Whirlaway sired by an English Derby winner. So in this year when England... Is that
allowed? I thought it only had to be American.
No, it's completely allowed.
Sure. That's part of the rules. Are you sure?
Yes, it is part of the rules. Okay. 1 week later, I'm writing a letter nightly. I'm like a letter. 1 week later, he wins the Preakness. 1 week later, he wins the Preakness, which is the only Triple Crown race that I've ever been to. I was at the Preakness, I think in 79, maybe. Is that 79, 80? It wasn't a Triple Crown year, so maybe 80.
In Maryland, obviously.
Yes.
But a week is so quick. It's not usually a week afterwards. It's usually a few weeks.
It's usually a couple or 3, and then it's a little longer to the Belmont, which is the longest of the 3 races.
Right.
But yeah, back then it was a week later. They were on the Joe Louis schedule. Joe Louis, by the way, had 4 fights between the Derby and the Preakness. He was fighting every 36 hours, I believe, at that point in time.
Guy was fit.
But he did fight 2 women and a Borzoi dog in that period of time. So, you know,
all right, whatever.
Weren't the tough fights, but you got to stay in shape. On the 15th of May, Mark.
Yeah.
Joe DiMaggio gets his first hit of the streak.
Yeah.
He hits it off Eddie Smith of the Chicago White Sox, who was a good pitcher, 10 years in the league, played for 3 teams, 2-time All-Star in both 41 and 42. And Joe D gets his first hit. He will not go hitless for another 62 days. It's 406 someone might get again, but I don't think anybody's going to get 56. Now, realizing that both of those records, and we'll talk about Ted Williams in the 406 later, this was in an era where pitchers pitch, you got the ball, you're supposed to go 9 innings.
Yeah.
And guys down 4 and 5 runs in the third, and they're keeping them in. That would never happen again today. Bullpen pitchers all pitch close to 100 miles an hour. They didn't have that back then. That's to take nothing away from Joe DiMaggio's record or Ted Williams, because they haven't been reached since. But that's one of the reasons that people ascribe to those records being able to be
sort of untouchable,
achieved in the
way.
40s.
I mean, we had, I think Pete Rose in 78, I want to say, had a 44-game hitting streak. George Brett, I think in 1980, hit 390.
Yeah.
And that's the closest we've come. And those were 40 years ago at this point in time. So, who knows? Who knows what could happen? I agree with you, John. I think it's tougher. I think it's tougher with all the specialty pitching in Major League Baseball. You never get to see a pitcher really more than twice through the lineup. I mean, normally a pitcher doesn't pitch too much more than maybe 2, maybe 3 times through a lineup. And back in that day, they would get a chance to see that pitcher 3 and 4 times every single game. Yeah,
it was a different game back then, but there's still just if you think about what you have to do, and when we get to the end of the streak, I'll give you the numbers on it, and it is absolutely and utterly remarkable. Now, Joe DiMaggio, this was the year that made Joe DiMaggio, because prior to this, he was a terrific player. He was an all-star every year up to that point. He was the MVP in 39. He was in the top 10 every year. He won 3, 39, 41, and 47. He was the MVP. But he wasn't really loved, and he got booed by Yankee fans at that point. He held out for money, which was we've seen that so many times at the ESPN Club, Mark, how people feel about athletes asking for more money. Imagine what that was like during the Depression. Hey, we don't have to. We can just look at next year and see what that's like.
The thing is I'm not sure how he could get booed. He came out of the gate and first of all, he had an MVP in 39. His rookie year, oh, by the way, he was 8th in MVP voting. The next year, 2nd. The next year, 6th. The next year, he wins it. The next year, 3rd. The next year, he wins it. He comes out too, Johnny, with these are his home run numbers from 36 on: 29, 46, 32, 30, 31. Now, listen to the RBI numbers out of the gate when he first gets to the big leagues: 125, 167 in 1937, 140, 126, 133. And I just don't understand that there's no one that came out of the gate faster than Joe DiMaggio until maybe Albert Pujols.
Right. But to your point, we talked about the Yankees, and you talked about the Murderers Row. The Yankees fans were used to great players.
Just so spoiled, man.
But remember at this time, though, Babe Ruth, who was the most beloved, obviously, and the greatest baseball player of all time. People don't debate me on this. Look at the offensive numbers and then realize that before he stopped pitching, he was the best left-handed pitcher in the American League. I'm sorry. We're just going to stop there. It's not a discussion. I won't discuss this with you, Mark. There are several things I will not discuss with you, and this is one of them.
But we don't have to agree to disagree on this one. We actually agree to agree on this one.
And Lou Gehrig was only a couple of years retired by 41, he was beloved for so many reasons. Sadly, because his career was cut short by ALS. But Gehrig was still alive at this point. Ruth was alive. DiMaggio had been injured. He'd had injuries. He hadn't played a full season up to this point. I think the most he played was like 140 games up to this point. So he was thought of as just another really good Yankee ball player. He just wasn't embraced by the fans.
Unbelievable.
That would change.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
That would change. On the 23rd of May, Joe Louis beats Buddy Baer, brother of Max Baer.
Right.
Who's the father of Max Baer Jr.,
right,
who played Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies.
And Max Baer killed 2 fighters.
Yes,
in the ring.
I'm glad you said that as opposed to like at a Dairy Queen, but it was actually in the ring. Not sure why he would be at a Dairy Queen, but why wouldn't you be at a Dairy Queen? I wish I was at a Dairy Queen right now.
No, there's a lot of fights to break out at Dairy Queens.
I want a Dairy Queen Dairy Queen chili dog and a chocolate shake. That's all I want. That would make me a happy man right now.
But then others would argue with that. Others would take offense at that order and fight you.
Baer was disqualified. He was having a good fight. In fact, he'd knocked Louis kind of silly a couple of times. And what happened in the 7th was Louis hit him after the bell, and Baer's cornermen came into the ring and were arguing with the referee. Apparently, it was very egregious, but it wasn't called. Whether or not it was seen, who knows? But it wasn't called. And Baer's cornermen would not get out of the ring, and so the referee disqualified Buddy Baer. So,
wow,
Louis on that one might have dodged a little bit of a bullet because Baer was also a pretty decent fighter. Again, it's a little unfair to call all of these guys bums, but that was the closest. Well, I'm going to say the closest, but that was the most controversial of the fights, though. There's a controversial one coming up too.
So Max Baer, brother of Brett Baer, is that what it is? Baer? No, it's not Brett Baer.
No, Buddy Baer.
Buddy Baer, father of Max Baer Jr.
Yeah.
Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies. How old do you think Max Baer Jr. is, Johnny?
Max Baer Jr. right now?
Yeah, right now at this second.
I would say Max Baer Jr. right now is probably, I'm going to say 35. He is 85 years old.
82, not bad.
All right.
No, he'll be 83 in December, so pretty close. Good job.
All right. Well, there you go. So that's Joe Louis as he continues to fight. On the 25th, Ted Williams goes 2 for 4, and he's hitting over 400 for the first time in the season. So he hits that on the 25th of May. He's hitting 404 after going 2
I want to stop you right there.
Okay.
If you don't mind. You said on May 8th, or I don't know what the exact date was, but you said early in May, he was hitting 308. He'd never hit below that the rest of the year. Do you remember what date that was? 308?
Yes.
May.
The 2nd of May.
The 2nd of May. Now we're talking
23 days later.
23 days.
Yeah.
He's able to get his average up to 400. Unbelievable.
Yeah. That's the interesting
torrid May.
And that's an interesting thing about Williams too, because if you look back, and I looked at the game by game logs, what a nerd I am.
No, that's the only way to do it.
There were times where he'd go 0 for a couple of days. Now he'd get some walks in that period of time, obviously, because he was a notoriously patient hitter. But then he would just go on these tears where he would go 3 for 4, 4 for 5. And that's the thing that you could do. That's the difference between the 406 and the 56 game hitting streak, Mark. You can get a couple of days off hitting 406. You can have a couple of off days. You can't really have that in the 56 game hitting streak. On the 30th of May, the last Indy 500 till after the war.
Wow.
And it's won by Floyd Davis and Maury Rose, 2 drivers. Also the last win ever by a 2-driver team. Maury Rose's Floyd Davis had driven most of the race. Maury Rose's car broke down and basically he kicked Floyd Davis out of his car and continued to win the race. Also should be pointed out as we're moving into the Second World War, that World War I flying ace Eddie Rickenbacker had been running the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He'd won an Indy 500 as well. And that was the last year that he did that. So again, the end of innocence, that was the Rickenbacker time at the Indianapolis
embodied by Eddie Rickenbacker.
All right, so let's look at the end of May and see where the Yankees and the Dodgers are at this point. Yankees are 13-13 on the month. They're 23-19 at the end of the month. They're in 3rd place still. The Dodgers go 17-8, but they're in 2nd behind St. Louis. 1 game ahead are the Cardinals. That'll be a year-long battle between the Cardinals and the Dodgers.
They were 13-3, weren't they? 13-3, 13-4 in April.
Yes.
and then they were 17-8.
Yeah,
so
and
that's 30-12, and they're not in first
one
place.
game back. They're one game back. Yeah, I know. That was and I don't spend as much time on that as I was really like to, because we just don't have that kind of time. But that National League pennant race in 1941, one of the reasons it was so magical. And then DiMaggio getting the hits, and we'll talk about a little bit later how he helped.
Cardinals were going to be a force throughout that entire decade, and we'll find out why a little bit later.
We really will. Joe DiMaggio has now hit in 16 straight by the end of May, and that's when people start paying attention.
Sure.
15 or 16 games in. Ted Williams is hitting 429 at the end of that. Yeah, absolutely. I think his highest average in the season, I think he was hitting 460 something at one point. On June the 2nd, a guy that we mentioned, Lou Gehrig, passes away on June the 2nd, 1941. It's interesting that he exits the stage, as to my point, DiMaggio now steps up on the stage and becomes a revered Yankee, as opposed to a guy like, and I don't want to take anything away from him, but at this point, he's like a Tony Lazzeri. He's just a great ball player.
It's like a Bobby Mercer.
Maybe, but more
Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, I guess. But Tony Lazzeri too is the guy who was on that Murderers Row, and he's a guy who's baseball fans know his name, but he doesn't reach that pantheon that a Gehrig or a DiMaggio or a Mantle ever does.
But he was part of that Murderers Row team.
He was.
So
he was.
DiMaggio, though, was clearly the best player on the Yankees at this point in time.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's amazing, Yankee fans, the amount of good fortune that they have had throughout the entire, throughout the last 100 years, really, is remarkable. Not just with the success on the field, but with the iconic players that have worn the pinstripes.
Yep, absolutely. On the 7th of June, 1941, Whirlaway completes the Triple Crown by winning the Belmont. He becomes the 5th Triple Crown winner of the 20th century. We've had 8 since. He was a terrific horse, and he really had a great post career too, because he was put to stud in France. So he got to get, hung out in France, picking up the women. So good, good for Whirlaway.
Well, if it was during the war, that's kind of rough, though.
He went over after the war, really transport, call the Vichy government. Hey, Marshal Pétain.
Put him over there in France during the. I'm not sure.
I love
Whirlaway would have enjoyed that.
This is Marshal Pétain. We want to drop Whirlaway off. You mind? He'd like to graze somewhere in the Burgundy region if he could, please. Finished in the money in each one of his starts as a 3- and 4-year-old. He was the first of 2 Triple Crown winners out of Calumet Farms in Kentucky. Citation in 48. They had 8 Kentucky Derby winners through that period, and they haven't had one since 48.
Was Citation the last one before Secretariat?
Yeah, 48. Yeah. And Secretariat then in 73. On the 18th of June of that year, that's the Lewis Kahn fight. Now, Billy Kahn, the Pittsburgh kid, was a light heavyweight, and he moved up to fight Joe Louis. This was the one fight of the year where Lewis was the favorite in every single one of those fights. But this was the one where they said, because their styles were so different, Lewis was a power puncher. And Kahn was a guy, he was quick, he moved a lot. He didn't put on any extra weight to fight as a heavyweight. So he's 25 pounds lighter than Joe Louis when the fight time. But he was quick and he was very good. In fact, Mark, in 1940 was the first year in, I think, 6 out of... Joe Louis finished as the best fighter in the world, and according to Ring Magazine, 6 out of 7 years prior to that. But in 1940, Billy Kahn by Ring Magazine was voted the best fighter in America. He led on scorecards coming into the 13th. So of 12 rounds, I think he had a 7-5 win on the scorecard. He was giving Lewis all kinds of problems, and it was the sort of fight, Mark, you would think you would see, which was Lewis would have a round where he'd get one of those power punches in on Kahn, and then Kahn would kind of run away from him for the rest of the round, trying to get his faculties back together. And then Kahn would come back when he did that, and he would hit him with combinations. He would move. He was a tough guy for Joe Louis to follow around. In fact, there was one point in the fight where Billy Kahn said to Joe Louis at the end of a round, "Hey, I'm giving you quite a fight." And Joe Louis said, "Yes, you are." It was that close. Unfortunately, Kahn was reading his own press clippings 12 rounds in, and he admits it, that at that point he was getting a little bit away from what his fighting style was, because he thought, and he'd hurt Lewis a little bit, and he really, really thought that he could beat him. Lewis had been working the body for the entire fight, and work the body, kill the head is the old boxing parlance. And so basically what happened was Khan moved in for the kill in the 13th round, and because of that, he left his defenses down, and he actually got knocked out in 13. He had knocked Lewis.
Joe Lewis.
He had
Joe
knocked Lewis down, and it was just it's considered one of the great fights of all time. After the fight, Billy Khan said to Joe Lewis, he goes, "Couldn't I have borrowed the title just for a while?" And Joe Lewis had a great quote. He said, "You had the title for 12 rounds and you couldn't hold on to it." So one of the great fights of all time, the Khan-Lewis fight. They will fight again, I believe, in
Rocky-esque in a way.
42. Yeah, it really was. It really was Rocky-esque. All right, let's check where we are at the end of June with our big heroes, DiMaggio and Williams. By June 30th, Joe had hit it in 42 straight, which kept him 2 away from Wee Willie Keeler's 44-year-old record of 44 home runs. The Yankees went 19
hitting streak, 44-game hitting streak. You mean
44? What did I say?
Home runs.
Oh, yeah, hitting streak.
Wee Willie Keeler didn't hit 44 home runs in his entire career.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. 44-game hitting streak, which he got in 1897. I don't believe all of Major League Baseball.
League, yes.
Hit 44 home runs at that point in time. I don't think it was allowed. I think if you hit a home run, it was an out. You hit it over the fence. We don't have the ball anymore. You're out.
Inside the park is the only one that counted.
Yep, absolutely. Yankees moved to 42 and 26, and they're in first place at this point. They will not surrender that through the rest of the season. Ted Williams goes 0 for 4 on June 30th. June 40th. Yeah, there. It was a different calendar.
It was
pre-World War II calendar.
With a different day.
0 for 4. Time. He's hitting 404. The Dodgers go 17 and 11, 47 and 23. They move into first place at that point in time. That'll go back and forth throughout the season, though, as mentioned. We move forward to July 2nd, 1941, 23 years before Jose Canseco and my birthday. Joe DiMaggio hits his 45th and passes Wee Willie Keeler. By this time, there were over 200 journalists traveling with the team. DiMaggio was smoking 4 to 5 packs of cigarettes a day. He was having all kinds of physical problems, but to be able to focus and do what he did up to that point in time is absolutely remarkable. And he breaks the record on July 2nd, 1941.
Right. So now he's the guy holding the record at 45 games.
So every hit after this, every game that he hits safely in is a record.
Right.
And we'll see how far he goes. We talked about DiMaggio being bigger in big games, being like a big stage.
Yeah.
Williams didn't get a lot of big stages. And the one that he did get in the World Series, he hit 200. They put the shift on, by the way, the shift that everybody hates, that everybody on the right side of the infield. And Williams was just such a stubborn guy that he wouldn't turn around and try to hit. He wouldn't try to hit in the hole around third base. But he did have the signature home run of his career until the last home run of his career, basically, was in the Major League Baseball All-Star game at Tiger Stadium. It was Briggs Stadium back then, where he hits a walk-off 3-run home run. Joe Gordon and Joe DiMaggio are on base at that point in time. Williams has always called it his finest moment. And
it's so interesting, John, because Williams, I think, had some good All-Star games, really good All-Star games.
Yep.
And Willie Mays, we mentioned him earlier about not having a good World Series record in terms of hits or average or home runs or anything. And Willie Mays often had just stellar, superb All-Star games. It's really interesting. I don't blame them that much because they didn't have a chance to get themselves to a place where they could handle the pressure because it didn't come to them. To your point, the big stage didn't come to them that often. Where DiMaggio had already gone through 3 World Series with the Yankees and won it. But you're absolutely right. Regardless of what's happening, DiMaggio has all those reporters, has all that pressure.
It's nuts.
His health is failing. He's smoking like a chimney, and he is still able. He's just that guy.
Yeah.
He's that guy that performs at his best when it matters most. And unfortunately, Williams. I would say though, that's not quite fair, because in the regular season, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about how Ted Williams finished the season,
and
what he did, and also the way he finished his career. He certainly had a flair for the dramatic.
He really did, and he pushed that Red Sox team in 41 to second place. Now they're well behind the Yankees, because the Yankees set the record for clinching the pennant early that year. I hate to bury the lead, but I want to say this too, because people look at All-Star games and say, well, it's just an exhibition. Remember, at this point in time, there was no interleague play. They didn't see these other teams unless they played them in a World Series. And it was a much more competitive situation. So it's not as if guys are throwing batting practice.
Yeah. No,
you got that
meant something.
Yeah. He hit it off Claude Passau. I just feel like when these guys give up these runs, I should tell you who they was. He was a 5-time All-Star and led the NL in strikeouts in 1939. So a quality pitcher.
Hence his selection in the All-Star game.
Yes, absolutely. On July 16th, 1941, DiMaggio hits his 56th. He goes 3 for 4 that day off of pitcher Al Milner, who spent 8 years in the league. That's where the record stops, because on the 17th, the streak ends. Let's take a little bit of a look at Joe DiMaggio's streak. Over the 62 days of the streak, DiMaggio struck out 5 times. He went 92 of 223. He either hit 408 or 409, depending on who you ask. And I think the 409, the people who came up with that, add the hit in that he got in the All-Star game, because he really did hit safely in 57 straight games, if you include the All-Star game.
Right.
He had 55 RBI, 15 home runs. He scored 56 runs. In the final 11 games of the streak, he hit 545. He went 24 of 44. The beginning of the streak, the Yankees were 5.5 games out of first. When it ended, they were 7.5 games in front.
My gosh. What a run.
They had a 14-game winning streak. That was they had the longest winning streak of them. Dodgers had a few longer ones, not longer, but had a few long ones, more long streaks during the season. The Yankees were 14-game winning streak. They won 17 of 18 between the 28th of June and the 17th of July. The numbers are boggling. And then when you think about the fact that he took that day off and then he hit in 16 straight games following that, he hit safely in 72 of 73 games.
Yeah, it's one of the most remarkable seasons of all time.
It really is. And to your point, the closest since in 1987, Paul Molitor hit 39. Pete Rose came the closest in 78. He hit 44. In the 21st century, only 2 guys have even sniffed it. Luis Castillo in 2002 and Chase Utley in 2006 hit in 35. That's 21 games short.
Yeah. And 35 is remarkable. But 56. Yeah. Unbelievable.
On the 17th, when the streak does come to an end, Ted Williams has an off day. In fact, he has the off day on the 17th and the 18th. He pinch hits in the front end of a double header on the 19th in the 12-8 loss to the Browns. The back end, on the back end of that, he goes 0 for 1 with a walk. His average dips to 393.
Uh-oh.
Yep. Boston's 45 and 40. They're only 3 games out. During the streak, DiMaggio hit 408 or 409, depending on who you ask. I could not figure which, because it said every different. I should go with Baseball Reference, which is 408, but then I read in books I was reading 409. Williams hit 412 in that period of time.
Well, you can take the at-bats, and you can take the hits, and you can find out the exact average, John.
You can, but I mean,
you have a calculator on your phone. It takes
I failed you, haven't I?
15 seconds.
I have failed you in trying to do this deep dive. I'd like to apologize to everyone involved for my lack of commitment. I read 2 books. I read 2 flipping books.
It's good. I'm glad
to do this.
I just got my book in, by the way, for the next deep dive. We'll get to that in a second.
Oh, I don't even know what it is. And I don't think you told me. Don't tell me. I don't want to know now. We got to move through this.
We have a lot more to do.
We're an hour in. Dodgers have an off day on the 17th, which is when the streak ends. On the 18th, there's 6-1 loss to the Cardinals. That makes them 56-28. They're first. They're 2 up on those Cardinals. We're closing fast. And that's all I'm going to. I was going to dive into something else on the Dodgers, but it's just not that important. New York ends the month 67-30. They're up 12 games. In their last 52 games, they've gone 44-8.
Man.
I mean, what was it fun to be a fan of another American League team at this point? Because I can't imagine that it was.
Not at all. That's why they drew 300,000 people a year, these other teams.
And the 50s are supposed to be this great year, too. But yeah, the great years if you live in New York. But if you're an American League fan anywhere else, and it's just horrid. Just horrid.
You got one decent year in Cleveland's okay. You know, the late 40s, early 50s. Cleveland's okay. Detroit is
Good, they have their years.
Semi-viable. St. Louis Browns are a tire fire from the get.
Team. They become the Baltimore Orioles.
They do become the Baltimore Orioles.
69.
So the White Sox seem pretty irrelevant.
Yeah,
forever.
Yeah. It was Yankees all the time at that point. So, all right, moving forward to the month of August. On the 3rd of August, 1941, Joe DiMaggio goes 0 for 4. And that ends a streak of 74 consecutive games on base.
Right, because there was a walk. He had a walk on the game that he game 57, right? He had a walk.
Yeah, he had a walk. 74 consecutive games on base. He would have, boy, I tell you, Billy Beane would have eaten him up in Moneyball.
Oh, I know.
Get on base. Just get on base.
Yeah,
that's all we need.
His OBP.
Wow. It's Ted's August. On 8-2, on the 2nd of August, he goes 2 for 3 versus Detroit to get to the 412 mark. And then, and this is remarkable, he hit safely in 27 of the next 35 games, and his average dropped 5 points.
Wow. I mean, but that's how hard it is to hit 400. Yes. That's the thing we keep forgetting. I mean, we're talking about the remarkable 1941 season of Joe DiMaggio, and you've outlined it brilliantly here, Johnny. It is remarkable. You cannot touch it on so many levels, but we kind of give a short shrift, even all these years later, to hitting over 400.
Right.
And you can hit safely in all those games, and out of 35, you hit safely in 28, and your average goes down. It is so hard to maintain a 400 batting average. But I'll tell you, we're not the only ones who give Ted Williams a short shrift in this season.
Nope, not at all. Not at all.
All the baseball writers did too.
DiMaggio starts to go cold though. As we move into August, as we're still in August, he goes 0 for 8 in a doubleheader versus the aforementioned St. Louis Browns, who were the worst team in baseball. They were a minor league for the Yankees, essentially. Through that period of time, the Yankees would buy up every good player that made their way up through the Browns farm system. You want to know how cold Joe went? His average dropped 25 points in 17 days.
Wow.
And then he sprains his ankle on the 19th and he misses 20 days. He will not be with the team when they clinch the pennant on the 4th of September, which, by the way, is the earliest any team has ever clinched the pennant.
The 4th of September?
Yeah.
Can you imagine those American League games all throughout September, probably attended by like 200 people?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's if you include the players.
Yeah. September 4th?
No, I believe at that point, the New York City police, if you were caught shoplifting or stealing of any sort, you were forced to go to a Yankee game. It's like, go, get in there. Because, I mean, God, talk about meaning nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, 25 points in 17 days, misses 20 days. So he really kind of steps off the stage at this point. But you know what steps on the stage in August, Mark? NCAA football practice begins.
Uh-huh.
Now, games don't start till late September, but some teams are starting practice in August. Guys are heading back to school.
College football is pretty popular in 1940.
It's much more popular than the National Football League.
Yeah,
at this point
certainly at that point.
Yeah, at that point in time.
But not as popular as horse racing, evidently.
It was not as popular as horse racing. The Minnesota Golden Gophers are coming after their 1940 national championship. So they're ranked number 1 coming into the season. You know who's ranked number 2? Let me give you a hint. You know?
No, I don't know.
You love them.
Notre Dame.
Nope.
SC.
Nope. Closer. Stanford, number 2 in the nation, coming into that season. The Gophers, our head coach is Bernie Bierman.
Bernie Bierman
is the head coach. I think we have a photo of Bernie somewhere. He was a head coach from 1919 to 1950. Head coach at Montana, Tulane, Mississippi State. There's Bernie. Minnesota, Iowa pre-flight, because he went. They had football teams that were demonstration teams that played during the war, and some of them actually played some college teams and some semi-pro. They were essentially semi-pro teams, but they were populated by NFL players and college players who had been drafted. But Bernie Bierman did that. Oh, by the way, also Bernie Bierman was the basketball coach at Montana, Mississippi State, and Tulane. Because
that's what you did.
Right. Because that's what you did. He's college Hall of Famer, 32 through 41 and 45 to 50 at Minnesota. He was 93, 35, and 6. He won 7 Big Ten. They were Big 9 a couple of years, by the way. Michigan State wasn't there.
But they didn't call themselves Big 9, though, did they?
No, it was called the Big
Ten. They've never adjusted per how many teams they have.
We won 5 national championships, and he had 5 undefeated seasons. So the Gophers are at practice in August, getting ready to take on try to win a second title. I don't know why that sentence was as hard as it was for me, but as I'm trying to read ahead at the same time.
I get it. I get it.
What I was going to say is they're trying to defend their title. That's what I was looking for, trying to defend their title, because I'm looking at the time here, and I'm just working my way through it as quickly as I possibly can. As mentioned, on the 4th of September, New York Yankees clinch the pennant, and it is the earliest that the pennant was clinched. They'll end up winning the American League East the American League by 17 games.
Right.
And making the last 24 days of the season just nonsensical. And why would we play them? 1 week later, on the 11th of September.
Doesn't matter.
No. 11th of September, 1941 is when Franklin Roosevelt announces that any German ships found in U.S. waters will be sunk on sight, as we ratchet up the tension. And this is when Charles Lindbergh decides he's gonna, there's something to say here. Lucky Lindy. He's now completely in full
in September.
Yeah, September 11th, the same day that as a response to FDR. And Lindbergh says, this is a quote, "The British, Jews, and FDR want to drag the country into war." So, yeah, that's pretty much the end of Lindy as an American hero. Sort of disgraced. And then the interesting story we find out, because he's married to Anne Morrow Lindbergh, as an author and famous in her own right. Apparently had an entire other family in Germany. Google it, people. He literally had another wife and family that his family in the States didn't know about. So, Lindy, living the high life.
Defending his German interests. Didn't
I
want
tell
to
you
get
what.
in the war. Just, I'll tell you what, because, Hitler for a long time thought that Churchill or whoever is the prime minister, they would see the Blitzkrieg, they would see what Germany was doing, and they would understand that, Adolf Hitler did not want England. He didn't
he admired England.
He did. He didn't want to touch their empire necessarily. And so he just wanted to be left alone in Europe, to just run roughshod over Europe.
And he wanted free navigation of the Atlantic, so he wanted to try to make a deal with England, and which is one of the reasons that Operation Sea Lion, which was the invasion of England, never happened. That and Hermann Goering, friend of Charles Lindbergh, thought that the Luftwaffe could bring Britain to its knees, and almost did. 6 days later, Stan Musial makes his Major League Baseball debut on the 17th of September 1941, and shows in the 12 games that he plays that year, Mark, what kind of player he's going to be. He goes 20 for 47, hits 426.
Stan Musial, unbelievable. We have, if you're watching YouTube, you can see the card right there. It's his rookie card. He looks like he's 10. And
I think he was 20.
Remarkable career for this guy. I think his last year was 1963. and was part of 3 World Series championships with the St. Louis Cardinals. But
just missed it by a year. Just missed another.
Right. Exactly. And I thought he was there for more this season, but that's amazing that he was a September call-up for the Cardinals.
Yep, he was
in the midst of their pennant race.
On the way to his career. And by the way, he would right away in 42, a year later, he finishes 12th in the MVP race and he wins it in 43. 36. And I have to bring it up because it's my favorite statistic in all sports. 3,630 career hits, 1,815 at home, 1,815 away.
It's the best.
24-time All-Star because there were a few years where they played 2 All-Star games.
Yep.
A 3-time MVP, led the National League in batting average 7 times, 17 times in the top 10. And the reason I bring him up, and the reason why there's another slide coming up that has a picture of Pete Rose, is to your point, he retired in 1963. His last hit went past Pete Rose, who was playing second base at that time. And Pete Rose was born on the 14th of March, 1941.
How about that?
So, yeah, just so he played against Stan Musial, who had been in Major League Baseball his entire life.
Yes.
Which
I love it.
Just crazy good. Also born in 41, Boog Powell down the road in Lakeland, Florida, actually. Dick Green, who we talked about when we talked about the A's. And Glassjaw Al Downing. He's called Glassjaw because he got in a fight at one point, had his jaw broken. But he is really famous, Mark, for something that happened 33 years later.
33 years later, Al Downing, all of my friends, Brian Ascari, Tom Marino, all of my Dodger friends remember this moment, and I certainly do, and celebrated it when I was in San Jose watching it on the telly. He was the pitcher of record. He was the one that gave up the home run 715 to Hank Aaron.
That's right.
Yeah, it was just a great moment. Although, the Dodgers had the last laugh in 1974 because they won the pennant that year. They
did win the pennant that year. Should be mentioned, too, that Houston Astros manager Dusty Baker is on deck at that game at Fulton County Stadium that night.
There it is.
Interesting. You can win a drink at a bar with that. All right. On the 25th of September, Brooklyn wins the pennant. First time in 21 years that Brooklyn wins the pennant. And it's... there's no more romantic
year of peace.
There's no more romantic team than the Brooklyn Dodgers in all of baseball. I just want to say that it's the most romantic team in baseball. What was your comment you wanted to say, Mark? What did you want to weigh in?
Well, I wanted to say that in 1941, the last year of innocence, pastoral time, it was setting us up for post-war America, for the great New York-centric post-war America. We've talked about this, John. If there was a time that you and I would like to go back to, we'd like to be about 22, 23 years old to 1948 New York City.
Oh my God, yes.
And if you think about it, once the war is over and baseball gets itself settled back in, from 1947 through most of the 50s, the Dodgers Yankees is a major force in Major League Baseball, and it is a romantic story.
Yeah. And sprinkle in the Giants. Sprinkle in the Giants there a little bit as well.
Sure, in 51 and 54 as well. Yeah,
it is within all these stadiums are within 15 miles of each other, and that's where the center of baseball. In Ken Burns Baseball Series, they call it the capital of baseball.
In the 1950s, I do believe that a New York team was in every single World Series.
They were. You're absolutely correct. So is that your deep dive?
It is not my deep dive, but it has something to do with the two of the teams we just mentioned.
The Brooklyn Dodgers were in first place for 76 days of that 1941 season. The biggest lead they ever had was 4 games. That was on the 15th of July. And the furthest behind they were was 3 on the 30th of July. It was a great pennant race in the National League. It deserves its own deep dive.
No doubt.
Let's jump back to the great Ted Williams. By the end of August, Ted's hitting .407, but he was on his own cold streak. September 10th through the 24th, he hits .270 in that period, which is fine baseball, but his average dropped to 12 points. So at the at this point, at 24th, Red Sox have 3 games left to play. They're not going to catch anybody. Williams is hitting .401. And the talk was just don't play that final 3 games in Philadelphia against the lousy Philadelphia A's. But Ted Williams, to his credit, Ted Williams is a man. Ted Williams, he wasn't going to do that. He was paid to play baseball. He's going to play baseball. Much better man. All right, so 3 games left. Game 1, he goes 1 for 4, and his average drops to 3.39955. Now that rounds up to 400.
It does.
So he would be a 400 hitter-ish.
Well, it does. It rounds up.
It is. You're right. It absolutely rounds up.
It's how it works.
Most people thought he shouldn't play the doubleheader. Doubleheader the next day. Final game of the season.
And he insisted on it, didn't he?
Joe Cronin, who is the manager, and we just saw Joe's picture here. Joe Cronin actually goes to Ted and says, "Look, there is no reason for you to play these games. You're a 400 hitter. Take the day off. Go fishing early," because Ted was a great fisherman. And Williams said himself, he goes, there was never a thought that I was going to do that. If I couldn't hit 400 the right way, I wasn't going to do it. So he just basically then decides that he's going to put all of this to rest. In the second game of the series, first game of the doubleheader, he goes 4 for 5 with 3 consecutive hits, gets a home run in that. To have lost 400 at that point, he would have had to go 0 for 5 in the final game of the series. Instead, he goes 2 for 3, ends up at 406. To your point, though, the roundup, he really ends up at 405.7, but he finishes it with a 406 average. No one's hit 400 since.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at Ted Williams' final line for the 1941 season. In 143 games, he went 185 out of 456, 37 home runs, 120 RBI, 147 walks. He only struck out 27 times that season.
Wow.
And he finished second in the MVP voting.
Yeah, seriously.
And oddly, not to Joe DiMaggio, actually to Tiny Casey. No, it was actually to Joe DiMaggio. He was 37 points behind DiMaggio.
I think that race, that 1941 season, and the microcosm of the sort of race, if you will, between Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams really captures that entire relationship, not only between those two athletes, but between the Yankees and the Red Sox. And it also encapsulates the relationship with the press.
Yeah.
The difference in the relationship with the press. DiMaggio, even though he's a quiet guy,
very quiet.
Didn't antagonize the press the way Ted Williams did.
Right.
Ted Williams did not like the media. And the fans no bones about it.
When they booed him in Boston, he stopped tipping his cap when he would hit a home run. You know, it was the thing. You'd tip your cap when you did that. And he never did it. He did it, I think, his rookie season. And then in his second season, he got booed for some reason. And he just would never do it. He admitted later in life, he goes, I was kind of stubborn, whatever.
I mean, even his last one is last at bat when he hits a home run, it's last at bat like in 1960 or 61.
1960. Hits a home run. And he said he thought about it. And then in 1960, the manager of the Red Sox then, whose name escapes me, and to deduct 2 points from my score for the deep dive, he made Williams go back out because he hit it in the top of the inning, and he made him go back out into left field at the bottom of the ninth. And the minute he got out there, he replaced him with somebody else because he was trying to convince him, Ted, at least just do it when you come back. And he wouldn't do it. And in fact, he walks by Pumpsie Green, who, by the way, Pumpsie Green is the Red Sox are the last team in Major League Baseball to integrate. Pumpsie Green is that guy, and he's playing second base, I believe, for the Red Sox at that point. But so Williams goes out to left field for the bottom of the ninth, and then he gets called back in with the replacement. And Ted Williams, in inimitable Ted Williams style, as he's coming by Pumpsie Green, he looks at him and goes, "You believe this bullshit?" That's just Ted Williams. In a
In a nutshell, and
a
a major reason, in my opinion, he didn't win the MVP. We talked about what a remarkable run Joe DiMaggio had, and there is no way to compare that season with anyone else's, what Joe DiMaggio had. But conversely, there's no way to compare what Ted Williams did as well.
It also shows, though, Mark, I mean, most of these MVP awards are usually best player on a good team.
That's what it is.
And that's, I mean, and again, I think both you and I would say the 56 game hitting streak is probably a hair's breadth more difficult than hitting a 406. But to that point, I think really why obviously his contentious relationship with the press, but then his team finished 17 games out, and they were really never a factor in the season.
That's what the MVP is, and the MVP is awarded usually after the postseason. And we have said this many, many times. You cannot convince me. You cannot convince me that the postseason doesn't have something to do with it.
Yeah, of course.
1988, Kirk Gibson hit 270 something
in
the regular season, wins the MVP. Right. Willie Stargell has a pretty mediocre 1979 season,
ridiculous,
but goes nuts in the World Series and somehow ties the legitimate MVP, Keith Hernandez, for that award.
Are you besmirching baseball writers, Mark? The paragon of virtue.
I am.
Our baseball writers.
Because they dare to defend that as well. We've interviewed baseball writers that says, no. I think it was, what's the guy from Boston who I have a
Bob Ryan?
Bob Ryan.
You hate
Bob Ryan.
Bob Ryan.
He's had some he had some personal issues.
I don't know.
I believe some domestic issues. Didn't he?
I don't believe Bob Ryan.
Is it Bob Ryan who constantly looks like he's had 17 before he's interviewed? Because he's that Irish Boston guy, has like our friend Jack which is funny because I forgot the great quote that they said about Billy Conn when he lost the fight to Lewis because he all of a sudden he got overly aggressive. They said he got a little too Irish. Conn, the Irish fighter. I completely agree about the postseason being. I don't care what anybody says; they're lying through their teeth. On September 29th. The only player I can remember in my lifetime, and I'm so sorry, John, I'll let you go after this, but the only player I can remember in my lifetime that really was from a bad team that won an MVP was Andre Dawson. They were like a fifth place team.
Yeah.
And I can't remember any others that were that obvious. But
you're
right.
Back at that and look at that MVP race and see how because he had to be just so head and shoulders above everybody else to get that, because that just doesn't make any sense to me that would happen. Not given that he didn't deserve it, but that's not the way that award ends up getting voted for. All right, let's jump ahead because we're pushing the bounds of our longest show ever, and I apologize in every way. September 29th, Joe Louis beats Lou Nova in the 6th with a technical knockout. Here is our Broadway reference, Mark. Lou Nova went on to be an actor, and he was in the Broadway show The Happiest Millionaire in 1956. There's Lou Nova with actor Walter Pidgeon, a favorite of mine. So there you go. I've been an actor my entire adult life, as have you. We've never set foot on a Broadway stage. Other than I don't know if you got a backstage tour of the Richard Rodgers at some point or anything, but Lou Nova, the fighter, he's in The Happiest Millionaire.
Millionaire.
And he's like 5th on the, on the marquee, even in this show. And there's like 20 people in the show, but there you go. All right, let's move on to the Subway Series. Yankees and Dodgers. Yankees had won 4 of the last 5 World Series games, Mark. They'd won 13 of their last 14 and 28 of their last 31. Again, they ruin all of our fun. The New York Yankees ruin everyone's fun. Game 1 goes sort of according to chalk. Yankees win the game 3-1. Red Ruffing, who's a guy who's really a forgotten player. He wins for the Yanks. He comes up in this because he's the first hitting coach for the New York Mets in 1962. He joins Casey Sengel's staff, and he's the first pitching coach. Pitching coach for the New York Mets. The staff had a 5.04 ERA, which was the worst in the majors. Red then retired. Joe DiMaggio goes hitless by the way, continuing the cold streak. He goes hitless in game 1, but the Yankees do take that game 3-1. That was the 1st of October. 2nd of October, one day later, the Dodgers win over the Yankees. DiMaggio goes 0 for 3 once again with one base on balls. Dolph Camilli puts Brooklyn up 3-2 in the 6th with a single. Camilli, an all-star player, one of the guys who getting him to Brooklyn, one of the reasons that Brooklyn had the success that they did. Again, we go back to Larry McPhail, who was a terrific general manager.
I believe he won the MVP that year.
I believe he did as well.
Camilli, out of San Francisco.
Yes.
Then ends up dying in San Mateo,
right
around 1997. I just want to say this: Gramps, my grandfather, born in San Francisco in 1909, 2 years after Dolph Camilli.
All right.
Camilli has that amazing career, comes back to San Mateo. That's where my grandfather lived and passed away in the exact same year. So they went to rival high schools just 2 years apart in San Francisco.
Yep.
Dolph Camilli.
Thanks
for allowing me to talk about not only San Francisco, but my family in San Francisco because of your deep dive, John.
Absolutely. By the way, Dolph Camilli had a brother named Frank Campbell. He fought under the name of Frank Campbell, and you mentioned it earlier, Mark. Max Baer killed him in a fight in 1930. He got a cerebral hemorrhage after losing a fight to Max Baer. So some more interesting information, including the stars of 41. Game 3, Yankees, Dodgers. All the runs in this game were scored in the 8th inning. Talk about your pitcher's duel. 2-1, the Yankees beat the Dodgers. DiMaggio goes 2 for 4 to get off the schneik. Hadn't had a hit in the series. And again, this was a scoreless game until the 8th, and Hugh Casey comes on in relief. He's the GOAT of this game. Comes on in relief in a scoreless game, 8th, and he gives up 4 straight singles and 2 runs, and that's all it takes. It's for poor Hugh Casey. He's a hard luck guy during this series. He really is a hard luck guy and a good pitcher.
And you can tell by this baseball card back in the day. If you're just listening to the podcast, tune into our YouTube and scroll all the way. I don't know, 2-3 hours in. Can't say you can see Hugh Casey's
death stare.
Yeah, he's just not happy. He just knows what he's.
Looks like
for.
You can see it. You can see it.
He knows his fate. He just knows his fate.
Yeah. It gets worse. 2-1 Yankees in the series on October the 5th, game 4. And this is the game that really most people think decides the series. Brooklyn coming off of obviously a heartbreaking loss in game 3. In game 4, it's 4-3 in with Brooklyn 2 out in the top of the 9th. And Hugh Casey, hey, Hugh Casey's coming on. Hugh Casey strikes out Tommy Henry. But one of the oldest rules in Major League Baseball is the passed ball on the 3rd strike. Catcher Mickey Owen drops the ball, doesn't drop the ball, gets behind him. Henrik gets to first. The Yankees rail off a bunch of hits, score 4 in the inning, and end up winning the game 7-4. DiMaggio goes 2 for 4 and scores a run. And this is really where it ends for Brooklyn. It's a tight game 5, but they really felt like they had them. They had won the game.
Yeah,
with Casey's strikeout. So boy, talk about a hard luck. Gives it 4 straight hits on the 4th, and then the dropped pass ball by the catcher to lose a game that they should have won by all accounts.
Right, and I mean you could argue that they should have won game 3 as well.
Yeah,
and game 4, and then it's a tight game 5. So that's a much closer series than winning in 5 would indicate.
Right. It really does. So we move along to game 5 a couple of days later. Yankees, Dodgers. Yankees end up winning this. Tiny Bonham has a complete game 4 hitter. He gives up 1 walk and 1 hit after the 3rd. Joe DiMaggio goes 1 for 4 in the series, strikes out a couple of times. And Brooklyn for the series, Mark, hits 182. And that really is the story of the series. They hit under the Mendoza line in that series. And they lose. Though for folks in Brooklyn, 20 years since they've been in a World Series and won a pennant, and it looked like, wow, the future is nigh. In any case, so that's your 1941 World Series after an amazing NL pennant race. The 2 records that'll probably never be broken in baseball. Yep. The Yankees securing the pennant on the 4th of September, making the last 24 days of the season moot. Boy, I certainly hope somebody brought that up when they decided to expand the playoffs, thinking, we lost a whole month of anybody paying any attention to baseball because of that.
No, hey, I think that's a big part of the wild card. It's like you keep as many teams involved as long as possible.
Yes. Oh,
and
absolutely.
Attendance stays vibrant.
I need to jump back because I missed one thing in September. On the 27th of September, the Minnesota Golden Gophers that we'd mentioned, they win their first game. And good for them going out to the coast and playing Washington in Seattle. And they beat the Huskies 14-6 for their first win. We now move into October with Minnesota. 3 games in the month of October. On the 11th, they beat Illinois 34-6. On the 18th, they beat Pitt 39-0. On that same day, Hideki Tojo is named Prime Minister of Japan. Spoiler alert, doesn't end well. On the 25th, they beat the 3rd-ranked Michigan Wolverines 7-0. It's their 8th straight win over Fritz Kreisler's Michigan team. They win their 8th Little Brown Jug in a row. They'll win their 9th in 1942. Since 1942, though, against Michigan, Michigan's gone 57-12-1 against Minnesota. Minnesota, who've won 3 of the last 25 games against the Michigan Wolverines. Moving into November, Minnesota plays number 9 Northwestern on the 1st, winning 9-7. By the way, that 7 points is the most points they've given up for the season up to this point. They'd given up less than 7 points in that season.
Bernie Bierman. They
dropped to number 2 because of that 9-7 victory. And then they beat Nebraska 9-0. And on the 15th, they go to Iowa and they beat, I believe, Niall Kinnick and the future Hall of Fame, future Heisman Trophy winner. I believe he wins in 42, 44. Should have checked that one out. This one, defense just collapses in this game, Mark. They only win 34-13.
Oh my goodness. They let the team down.
Trouble brewing.
Sure.
Up in Minnesota. And on the 22nd, they beat Wisconsin 41-6 to finish their undefeated season. Once again, they only gave up double digits one time. Here's their line on the season. They outscored their opponents 186-38. They had 3 shutouts. Only one team scored over 10 points. That was Iowa 34-13. And they win the national championship in college football. November still 27th. We mentioned it. Joe DiMaggio wins the American League.
And they go on to win how many since then?
None.
The Minnesota Golden Gophers go on to win how many since that 1941 season?
None. They don't win anymore. That's it.
I'm sorry.
That's 0. That'd be none. Okay. Fair enough. Joe DiMaggio wins the AL MVP on the 27th. Dolph Camilli, to your point, wins the NL MVP because MVPs go to the best player on the teams that play in the World Series.
It's true. That's true.
One day later, the Japanese Naval Strike Force sails out of Hiroshima Bay. Again, not going to end well. Just saying. Move forward to December.
May want to rethink that.
Yeah, might want to rethink that move. In December, obviously on the 7th, Pearl Harbor is bombed. On the 8th, Franklin Roosevelt declared.
Hang on. What happened on the 7th?
Pearl Harbor. Google it.
I'm sorry.
Google it. Don't watch the movie. It's garbage. One of the worst movies of all time. What a piece of crap that movie is.
The reason I wanted to see that movie so bad was because of the bomb cam, if you will.
Yeah.
That there was a camera on the bomb, sort of a la Dr. Strangelove, although this is
without Slim Pickens riding it down.
Exactly. And it looked so cool, and it was so like, oh my gosh, here we go. We're going to really get into this. And then it was that movie.
Horrible. On the 9th, Boo Smith of Minnesota wins the Heisman Trophy again because, goes to the best player on a really good team. But Boo Smith was a great football player. Played a couple of years in the National Football League as well. Speaking of the National Football League, on the 14th, the Bears beat the Packers 33-14 in the first divisional playoff in the history of the NFL. They both finished 10-1 and had to play a playoff game with Chicago. Yeah. Prior to that, never happened.
And hadn't Chicago won in 1940 by just destroying the Redskins?
Yeah.
I'm just adding context to
73
the
to
end
nothing.
of your show,
They beat
John.
them 73 to nothing. Yes.
Yeah.
The worst ever.
Right.
On the 21st, 4 days before Christmas, the Bears play the Giants for the NFL championship. Bears win 37-9. The Bears led 9-6 at the half. New York opening drive of the second half. They kicked a field goal to make it 9-9, and the Bears scored 4 unanswered touchdowns after that. First team in the NFL in National Football League to win consecutive titles. They won 5 total in that period: 27, 32, 33, 40, and 41. And thus, we all get up 4 days later on Christmas morning, have our last Christmas of. There aren't going to be any war stories again until early into 42. And that is 1941, one of the most remarkable seasons in sports. I'd like to call it a deep dive. It's sort of a medium dive because I could have gone so much deeper, but it took me an hour and 40 minutes to get through that.
Well, there was a lot of banter, which I think
there was banter.
There's a lot of banter, and you're right. You could have done 4 volumes on this, and
could have done it all on the NL pennant race.
Just fascinating stuff. Just a wide breadth of fascination, not just baseball, not just college football, but boxing, horse racing, obviously everything happening in the world. You didn't even mention, you barely mentioned invading Russia.
Hitler I barely mentioned it. I also didn't mention that Bobby Cox was born in, I missed that one. And I believe it was April of 41 too. I think he and Ted Williams, same age.
And I believe Paul Simon was born in 41.
There you go. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio?
There you go. It's a full circle. Full circle.
There it is. There's deep dive number 5.
Deep dive 5. Congratulations, Johnny. Well done out of you. A week from today will be deep dive 6, and it will be on the Giants and the Dodgers. The rivalry, the best rivalry, if you ask me, in all of sports. And I know I've had lots of arguments with this with John Pelkey and the like. Certainly the oldest rivalry in Major League Baseball. And here it is. This is one of the books I'm going to read, The Giants and the Dodgers. Basically going to focus, John, on anywhere from 6 to 8 key events. Okay. In Giants-Dodgers history. We'll try and confine it to that. You can imagine what one of the major ones will be. A few of the major ones involve pennant races, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how each team has acted as spoilers for the other throughout the course of the decades, and it's fascinating how even if they're not competing for a pennant, how the Dodgers can spoil the Giants' plans, the Giants can spoil the Dodgers' plans. There's a few of those, and then there's some individual incidences as well that we'll get into. It should be a lot of fun. It's Giants Dodgers. I'm gonna talk about maybe 6 to 8 events.
Okay.
As I mentioned before, and I'm going to try and have, an even amount favor the Giants, an even amount favor the Dodgers. I'm going to do everything I can to be fair and balanced with this Giants-Dodgers, because it really is. The record of them playing each other, I mean, they've played each other 2,500 times over the course, and I think it's separated by 8 or 9 games. It's amazing. Yeah,
and then they both moved to California in the same. It's just it really is. It's not the best rivalry in sports. We all know that. Well, all of us, but you apparently. But it is an awfully good one. I also want to point.
What would you say is better, Duke, Carolina,
Ohio State, Michigan, maybe Yankees, Red Sox is such a tough one though because there's so many periods of time where
hammer and nail.
They weren't relevant. You're right. There's been a lot of that with the Dodgers and the Giants too. I mean, there've been those periods.
A lot of that with Ohio State and Michigan as well, and
not as much.
Does anyone really care about that outside of upper Midwest?
Yes, they do. I should point this out though. The Giants, when they were in New York, they played in the cavernous Polo Grounds. And one of the things I forgot to mention was when you talk about boxing. Boxing was one of the favorite sports. The Khan Lewis fight was in the Polo Grounds. They had 60,000 people there for that fight.
Dang, you're right. So it's like, it was like the Beatles.
Oh my God. Yeah. Just crazy. You can get 60.
I just want to remind everyone, we talked about Hank Aaron today, breaking Babe Ruth's record. Willie Mays played in the cavernous. You mentioned it, John. Cavernous Polo.
Cavernous.
Then he moved and played in Candlestick Park, which was the worst hitting park in the swirling wind. Horrible.
Yep.
And where did Hank Aaron play his ball?
When in Atlanta. when Atlanta, when they left Milwaukee, a place called the Launching Pad. And I don't think County Stadium in Milwaukee was, I think it was pretty much of a hitter's park as well. Yeah. No, I know.
Giants Dodgers coming up.
Willie Mays, better baseball player than Hank Aaron, all around. Hank Aaron's one of the all-time greats, but Willie Mays had more. He was a 5-tool player, and
you could
and
make
Hank
an
Aaron
argument that next to Babe Ruth, Willie Mays is the best player.
Yeah, because Hank Aaron was a much better base runner, much better, faster guy early in his career. You know, most people remember him when he was older in his career, and he was an absolutely phenomenal baseball player. But he didn't have all the tools that Willie Mays did. No, come on, absolutely not. Ooh, man, I tell you what, I need a half a bottle of scotch, and wow, that was just a lot. Thank you, David Lowe, saying it was a fantastic show. I'm so glad he enjoyed it. I gave the Cubs a little bit of love for having the first organ at a Major League Baseball park.
Is David Lowe a big Cubs fan?
He is. Yeah, he went to orthodontic school at Northwestern. Yeah,
wow,
absolutely. So huge. He said David Lowe, great stage actor, friend of ours. Just a great guy.
Yeah, another good friend of ours, John, that has so much more success in life than us.
Yeah, well, where have we set the bar? Are you kidding? An infinite capacity for making a bad situation worse.
Leo DeRocher, our patron saint.
He really is. But David Lowe, great, and people in the theater always ask him, where's your favorite place in the world? And he's always said Wrigley Field. And I completely understand that. So there it is. The longest deep dive ever. My God.
Longest after further review show ever.
Oh. And it was 1 page shorter than my last deep dive.
It's a work in progress, folks. We're still trying to determine if this 2 show a week thing is working. This once a week deep dive thing. Any comments you have, you can email us at podcastafr@gmail.com. And in the course of all this, we're trying to rehearse ahead of time. We're trying to get the PowerPoints done, in a legitimate, clean, easy way.
We had a rehearsal. We've never rehearsed before.
We've had a rehearsal. Yeah, you and I have written this stuff together, and we've maybe put some PowerPoint together, and then we've just dove right in.
Yeah.
Not today. And the next thing we have to, approach and tackle is editing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because I also think, John, that the banter is part of the fun. And if it's just like you were saying, what we were just reading Wikipedia in the first few deep dives. We don't want that narrative.
I did not ever now we use Wikipedia for a couple of things, but I did actually read books that I paid for. I'm not making any money. I'll never make another penny as long as I live. My lifetime earnings are set. Look at what I've made up to the age of 56. I'll never make another dollar, but I was spending money because I wanted that show to be better. And here's the other thing, Mark. Unilaterally, you came to me and said, John, 2 shows a week, no longer 3. And I said, Mark, that's denying the AFR audience, or as we like to call them, your family and elementary school friends, high school friends. It's denying them after further review. And people have complained. There have been complaints, as you know.
There have been people that have said they're sad at this decision. It's still a work in progress. We're still determining whether or not we're doing this. And again, it's nothing's unilateral. Nothing is unilateral. We're going to make an AFR commercial coming up. And in theory, we are as well. So we'll see if this works out, Johnny.
Well, I just felt like
back to 3 shows a week. Who knows?
I just felt like, if you're going to take a show away unilaterally, that I'm going to give them the same amount of after further review. I'm just going to pack it into 2 shows. I'm going to quote the not great and highly disliked Lou Holtz. We're going to get 3 hours of practice in, no matter how long it takes. So there you go. There it is.
2-hour after further review show. Thank you very much. 1941.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Dane Becker, if you're listening,
awaits.
Mark will be calling you.
Dane Becker awaits.
I might actually see Dane Becker tomorrow. So, if you want me to ask him what his deep dive is going to be in 2 weeks, he'll let you know. Probably something succinct and entertaining, which this may have been neither of.
All right.
All right, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks everybody and everyone else. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll try to edit our deep dives, but this is what you get. We'll be back on Monday to talk about things in sports with actual live sports going on, more than live sport going on, and maybe some more information about football. Who there have been big decisions made we haven't even talked about. We'll be back on Monday. For Mark Ferrer and Jeff Taylor, I am John Pelkey. Thanks so much. We'll be back on Monday with more After Further Review. Take care, everybody.